He dared to challenge an entire continent's stance, live, on a call that lasted 2 hours, and ignited a diplomatic firestorm that no one saw coming. That is exactly how observers describe the shocking phone conversation between Russian President Vladimir Putin and President Emmanuel Macron of France, which took place on July 1st, marking their first direct discussion since September 2022. The stakes could not have been higher. Iran's controversial nuclear program, the raging conflict in Ukraine, the ever-present tensions between East and West, these were all on the table, and the dialogue was anything but polite small talk. Today we are venturing into the heart of this tense, high-stakes exchange, and the many implications it has for international politics, regional balances of power, and every single one of us who follows global affairs. In this truly gripping exposé, we will unravel the web of delicate issues that led to this unprecedented meeting of minds. We will examine the urgent questions. Why did Macron insist on an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine? How did Iran suddenly become the focal point of intense scrutiny, especially after controversies involving its nuclear facilities? And can there be a compromise that satisfies everyone? France, Russia, Ukraine, and even the wider coalition of the United Nations Security Council? Buckle up, because this examination is guaranteed to be filled with insight, controversy, and more than a few surprises. In this program, we will take a deep dive into the core of the crisis. What exactly did Vladimir Putin demand in regard to Ukraine's territorial realities, and how might it reshape the map as we know it? We will also look into Macron's multi-pronged argument, why he called for Iran's strict collaboration with international watchdogs, and how he perceives the broader role of diplomacy in diffusing escalating tensions in the Middle East. Plus, we'll explore the enormous drama behind the scenes, how this phone call was preceded by careful coordination with top leaders, including Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and the United States' former President Donald Trump, hinting at alliances and dialogues that might reach far beyond the public's view. But we should not forget the extraordinary backdrop. Russia and France are, of course, both permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. That means their decisions, and any statements they make, could shape the course of collective action for years to come. They have the power to propose or veto resolutions, to build or dismantle international consensus, to forge alliances, and to fracture them. And as the phone rang in the Kremlin, with Macron on the other end, these powers were not only theoretical, but entirely real, and they set the stage for a conversation that might redefine global conflict resolution. With the potential for fresh negotiations now on the horizon, the question on everyone's lips is, will these talks herald a genuine thaw, or will they only deepen the fissures that have emerged since Russia's invasion of Ukraine? Let's rewind the clock to paint a more detailed picture. The Russian invasion of Ukraine remains a major, ongoing crisis. Russia's annexation of certain territories is a move that many in the West, and in Ukraine, roundly condemn. Vladimir Putin, resolute in his convictions, has repeatedly characterized the conflict as a direct offshoot of what he terms the West's dismissive approach to Russia's long-standing security concerns. On the point of ceasefires and negotiations, the Kremlin has a fairly unwavering sentiment. Any agreement must account for what they like to call the new territorial realities. This phrase, of course, insinuates that the annexed regions should be recognized as officially part of Russia. Meanwhile, for President Emmanuel Macron, the sanctity and sovereignty of Ukraine's borders has become an unshakable principle, a principle that he insists cannot be compromised for the convenience of war termination. The friction between these viewpoints sets the scene for captivating verbal sparring, strategic posturing, and possibly the seeds of a large-scale peace plan, if either side proves flexible enough. But it is not just about boundaries on a map. It is about principle, constantly weighed against the tangible human cost of war, destroyed infrastructure, displaced populations, and global ramifications that extend beyond Eastern Europe. Macron's immediate goal, as stated, is a ceasefire, one that would stop the fighting quickly. Yet from the Russian perspective, halting the offensive without formal recognition of the annexed territories can seem like a half measure, or even a public admission of failure. Once you grasp these underlying motivations, you begin to see the complexity, bridging a divide between ideologies that define progress, security, and victory in truly divergent ways. In the background stands tension with Iran, seemingly unrelated at first glance, but in reality, intimately tied to the dynamics of global power. Iran's nuclear program has, for years, been a magnet for controversy, especially among Western nations who suspect that Tehran aims to develop nuclear weapons under the guise of civilian research. The country's leadership denies these accusations, citing only peaceful intentions and pointing to its membership in global treaties, specifically the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, as proof. But the news that Iranian parliamentarians had approved a bill to suspend cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency after external bombing of nuclear sites has rattled the international community. Israeli and American strikes on Iranian sites, intended from their perspective to stop Iran's alleged nuclear weapons program, only added fuel to the fire. Observers warn that diminishing transparency or reducing oversight from global nuclear watchdogs could spark fresh proliferation risks, especially in a volatile environment where even a small miscalculation could lead to severe consequences. This is precisely the juncture where Putin and Macron's phone call gains an edge. The French president insisted on open, honest, and stringent cooperation between Iran and global inspectors, while Putin stuck to the line that Iran's right to develop peaceful nuclear energy must be respected. The potential middle ground might lie, as always, in well-orchestrated negotiations, though it is still anyone's guess whether that will happen. The conversation, which the Kremlin called substantial, addresses matters that go far beyond the fates of Russia and Ukraine. Indeed, it involves the entire Middle East region's stability, the delicate balancing act of global nuclear policy, and the continuing specter of potential confrontation between major world powers. One phone call, 2 hours worth of intense discussion, some might argue that is hardly enough to resolve such complex issues. Yet the fact that it happened at all, after close to a year of silence, signals that there might be an opening, however slender. Curiously, before and after the conversation, Macron placed calls to President Volodymyr Zelenskyy of Ukraine in an effort to keep him informed. This suggests a carefully choreographed diplomatic dance, ensuring that no party feels sidelined or blindsided as the West tries to find new openings to speak with Putin. Late-night briefings, hushed teleconferences, unsaid reservations — this is the hidden world behind the headlines. Every statement is measured, every message weighed, because while the public sees a broad outline of the conflict, the real drama unfolds in closed-door negotiations, fueled by a delicate interplay of national interests, personal pride, and the universal desire, at least rhetorically, for peace. What about the direct references to Donald Trump? Though out of office, his name continues to pop up, illustrating the still lingering influences of his presidency on the world stage. As former president of the United States, Donald Trump introduced policies toward Iran and Russia that diverged sharply from his predecessors. Some say his approach propelled tension further. Others claim it introduced a certain blunt clarity. Regardless, the mention of Trump in these updates underscores that the twists and turns of American foreign policy remain a crucial factor in how Europe and Russia interact. The phone call between Putin and Macron might also reflect attempts to recalibrate alliances in a post-Trump era, while acknowledging that the United States, now overseen by another administration, still wields enormous sway in how negotiations proceed. This entire story is a study in power dynamics. Vladimir Putin, confident in Russia's capacity to sustain the conflict in Ukraine, believes that the West's reluctance to incorporate Russian security concerns paved the way for war. He sets the conditions for peace on acceptance of the new map, an expectation that would be a major concession for Ukraine and the West. Emmanuel Macron, often recognized for trying to broker dialogue even in the tensest circumstances, urges an end to the hostilities first, followed by thorough negotiations on a potential settlement that would, from his perspective, respect the territorial sovereignty of Ukraine. Layering over this is the matter of Iran. Nuclear energy developments that some suspect could lead to militarization, with the West alarmed and Russia, to some extent, championing Tehran's right to pursue atomic energy peacefully. If you are finding this deep look into the behind-the-scenes drama insightful, consider sharing your enthusiasm with others. Learning how leaders engage with each other in times of crisis highlights the importance of staying informed and connected. So, if you appreciate these illuminations, feel free to give this content a like or follow along to stay in the loop of further deep dives. Now, where do we go from here? Let us envision the possible scenarios. One scenario sees progress. Spurred by renewed communication and pressure from multiple fronts, we might witness an internationally backed compromise in Ukraine, an immediate cessation of hostilities, coupled with a transitional arrangement where disputed regions remain under some form of monitored status. This hypothetical scenario could open further channels for negotiating the underlying issues, from Russia's rejection of the existing security framework to Western concerns that Russia seeks to expand its sphere of influence. For that to happen, confidence-building measures would be critical. Trust does not simply appear out of thin air. It requires repeated cooperation, transparency about intentions, and some demonstration of genuine good faith. On the Iranian front, that same optimistic scenario might see Tehran returning to robust engagement with the International Atomic Energy Agency, offering full clarity on its nuclear activities, and in exchange, obtaining the easing of certain sanctions that have weighed heavily on the Iranian economy. This, in turn, might reduce tensions in the region, lessening the impetus for clandestine operations by nations determined to prevent Tehran from acquiring advanced weapons. Such a development could theoretically stabilize the entire Middle East, at least in part, by ushering in fresh diplomatic channels, trade deals, or security pacts. However, to achieve these breakthroughs, Russia, France, and the broader community of nations would need to present a united front, something that appears challenging given the lingering mistrust between NATO-aligned countries and Moscow. A second bleaker scenario underscores the global anxieties that keep many officials awake at night. Lines of communication could break down again, leading to an intensification of the war in Ukraine. This might happen if Russia doubles its efforts to claim disputed regions in a more permanent capacity, or if Western nations supply Ukraine with increased weaponry, fueling the conflict with tragic results for civilians. If further aggression erupts, it might also overshadow the Iranian conversation, pushing it to the sidelines until the nuclear standoff intensifies again in the future. The phone call that just took place between Putin and Macron would mark just a fleeting moment of possible positivity, overshadowed by deep structural divides. Such an outcome might also exacerbate friction within the European Union, as some member states maintain more hardline stances on Russia, while others, worried about economic or energy consequences, might push for partial reconciliations. We have seen these divisions simmering under the surface for a while now, but let us talk about possible middle roads. When you look closely at how diplomacy often works, you see that extremes, while they make for dramatic headlines, rarely persist as the final word in negotiations. The phone call might have signaled both sides' willingness to stand their ground, but also to keep communication channels open for some future deal. Diplomatic give and take might allow Ukraine to retrieve certain territories or finalize autonomy arrangements, while Russia preserves some measure of influence or partial recognition of changes on the ground. In Iran's case, the middle road might revolve around stepped-up monitoring by the International Atomic Energy Agency and guaranteed relief from certain sanctions, preserving Iranian dignity and Russian support, but reassuring France and other worried nations that weaponization is not on the horizon. And do not forget about the swirl of personalities at play. Emmanuel Macron alone is known for his proactive, sometimes theatrical approach to foreign policy. He has frequently inserted himself into crises, whether in Lebanon, the environment, or by reaching out to Russia with a diplomatic approach that some European partners once found naive. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin, deeply rooted in the security apparatus of Russia, rarely makes concessions unless they serve what he believes to be Russia's broader strategic interest. Each has a robust sense of national pride, shaped by centuries of historical experiences and hammered into place by more recent crises. For that reason, any compromise would likely need to be framed not as an admission of weakness, but as a demonstration of leadership and reasoned statesmanship. Meanwhile, the Iranian leadership stands as a separate player, wary of both Western interference and over-reliance on any external power, including Russia or China. Their nuclear program is a rallying symbol that resonates with national pride and a sense of independence. The Mideast region, always a mosaic of alliances and rivalries, sees Tehran's stance as significant not only in terms of nuclear proliferation, but also in how it might affect the power balance among countries like Saudi Arabia, Israel, Turkey, and beyond. Here is another often overlooked angle: the economic dimension. Sanctions remain a key lever in global politics. European nations, including France, have used them to apply pressure on Russian banks, businesses, and wealthy individuals. The United States, under multiple administrations, has used them heavily against Russia and Iran as well. Russia has responded with counter-sanctions, restricting the import of certain goods, or forging new deals with other partners outside the Western sphere. Iran, too, has pivoted toward alternative trade networks to bypass Western restrictions, forging partnerships with other nations that do not abide by the sanctions. This complicated dance of restrictions and reciprocal responses profoundly influences each country's approach to diplomacy. A phone call between Putin and Macron automatically touches on whether there might be room to ease some sanctions if progress is made, or, conversely, intensify them if it appears that conflict is escalating again. As you can see, we find ourselves in a moment pregnant with potential. Will there be new progress on nuclear compromise? Will we finally see a shift in the intertwined crises gripping both Eastern Europe and the Middle East? Or is this burst of dialogue doomed to remain a footnote in the historical record of missed opportunities? The truth is that we do not have that answer yet, but one thing is certain. The script for global politics is being written in real time, and none of the major characters plan on stepping off the stage. If the unfolding revelations of this diplomatic saga have sparked your curiosity or made you look at international relations in a new light, we invite you to subscribe or follow so you never miss another analysis. It is by fueling these conversations that we collectively remain vigilant, informed, and open to learning about solutions, and yes, even controversies, that are shaping the world's future. Let us circle back to the final question. Are the new territorial realities that President Putin insists upon going to become the recognized framework for peace, or is it all a non-starter for Macron and Zelenskyy, who prioritize the unconditional integrity of Ukraine's borders? We know that prior to this phone call, Macron was in close consultation with Zelenskyy, quite possibly ensuring that no major statements or concessions would be made without Ukrainian approval. That underscores that while Putin and Macron are speaking heads of their respective states, the real circle of conversation is bigger than two men on a telephone line. Moreover, there is the broader coalition of the West, which includes NATO nations. Many question whether NATO might adapt its own posture if fresh negotiations look promising, and, of course, how the United States, in its current administration, weighs into the matter. We have already seen major arms packages heading east, reinforcing Ukrainian forces. Is the West prepared to scale back that support if meaningful concessions are offered? Or will the pressure remain high, effectively telling Russia that Western support for Ukraine will continue until a decisive settlement emerges? On the Iranian side, the phone conversation, while focusing on the Iranian nuclear issue, also highlights that both Russia and France see themselves as key architects in resolving or influencing big global questions. For Macron, it is an opportunity to demonstrate that France remains a heavyweight in global policy, not overshadowed by the massive presence of the United States. For Putin, it is a chance to show that Russia, under sanctions and scorn from many Western entities, still sits at the table, still relevant, indeed essential, when it comes to forging global security narratives. And what of the other Security Council members? China, the United Kingdom, the United States. Their stances might tilt the scales either in favor of a deal that reins in Iran's nuclear ambitions while protecting its energy rights, or else lead to greater confrontation. Throughout all this, we must not lose sight of the real human lives at stake. In Ukraine, countless families have been uprooted, towns destroyed, and futures disrupted. In Iran, sanctions have created economic hardship, limiting access to certain goods and fueling tensions among different social strata. Russia, too, faces the consequences of war, both in terms of economic strain and the human toll on soldiers and civilians alike. France, as part of the European Union, experiences the strain of refugee intake, energy concerns, and the unpredictability of an extended conflict near Europe's borders. Global watchers can never reduce any of these conflicts to mere talking points. Each tangibly affects everyday citizens. Yet, perhaps, in the midst of adversity, we find the impetus for real peacemaking. Sometimes big changes arise from conditions so dire that everyone feels compelled to contemplate a new path. Could we be on the cusp of that moment? The phone call between two world leaders might be far from enough, but as a starting point, especially if the lines of communication remain open, it could sow seeds that may later blossom into effective treaties, or at least partial agreements. One dialogue can be the impetus for many more. And with so many watchers, from the smaller states in the Middle East to the big powers in the East and West, from the everyday folks in war-torn regions to the statesmen drafting possible frameworks in parliament halls, there is a sense that everything is on the line. In speaking about the Iranian nuclear issue, we likewise speak about preventing another potential flashpoint in a region that has already seen more than its share of conflicts. Iran's continuing membership in the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons is the biggest reason many keep insisting on patient diplomacy, rather than immediate confrontation. As Putin himself stressed, it is essential to ensure that if Iran is abiding by its obligations, it must be granted the respect of its right to peaceful nuclear development. Macron, by contrast, underscores that respecting that right must be inseparable from thorough cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Without transparency, trust evaporates. This tension is exactly where the conversation gets complicated, but also reveals the potential for compromise, an arrangement that ensures no secret militarization, with sufficient oversight to quell global fears. We end this analysis with a final thought on the meaning of leadership in times of crisis. Many critics lambasted Macron back in the first quarter of 2022 for engaging in phone calls with Putin at all, suggesting that it led nowhere. Some also accused him of legitimizing Russian actions. Yet those calls, along with this most recent one, set a precedent. That dialogue, even if it fails, must be tried. The alternative, a total breakdown in communication, risks leaving the world in the dark about each other's next moves, fueling paranoia, and potentially stoking bigger fires. By the same token, if Putin truly desires an arrangement that is acceptable to the West, beyond rhetorical posturing, he might discover that an open phone line to a key European leader is indeed the quickest path to forging a workable solution. Will it succeed? No one can say for certain. The details remain locked in official transcripts, private notes, subtle gestures. But one takeaway from that dramatic 2-hour conversation is that both leaders see the stakes: Iran's nuclear question, the devastation in Ukraine, and Europe's uneasy future, as far too substantial to ignore. For onlookers around the world, this is a clarion call reminding us that global stability is tenuous. And while one conversation alone will not instantly rewrite these tensions, it might shape them for better or worse.